Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back in time into the flickering shadows and acrid smoke of the world's most mysterious laboratories. Imagine a place where science is tangled with magic, where prayer is a part of the chemical process, and where the ultimate prize isn't just knowledge, but immortality itself. You're in a cluttered workshop, lit by a single sputtering flame. Strange glass vessels, twisted into beautiful and bizarre shapes, bubble away over a low fire. The air is thick with the smell of sulfur, roasting metals, and something else. Something you can't quite place, but it smells ancient and dangerous. This is the world of the lost alchemists. And fair warning, considering the sheer number of toxic substances they handled with no safety gear, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments below, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes are still adjusting to the gloom, but you can make out the details. You are standing on a floor of rough-hewn stone, littered with charcoal dust and spilled powders of unsettling colors. Books are everywhere, not neatly on shelves, but piled in precarious stacks, their leather covers cracked and their pages filled with a script that looks more like a secret code than any language you know. This is the life's work of one person, a single-minded obsession made real. Your host, the alchemist, is hunched over a small furnace in the corner, its soft orange glow the only real source of warmth in the room. This furnace isn't just for heat. It has a special name, the Athanor, and it's designed to maintain a steady, gentle temperature for weeks, months, or even years. Patience, you're learning, is the alchemist's most crucial tool. You take a tentative step closer, trying not to knock over a flask of what looks suspiciously like boiling urine. The alchemist doesn't seem to notice you. His focus is absolute. He's chasing a ghost, a legend whispered down through the centuries, the Philosopher's Stone. You've heard of it, of course. In stories, it's a magical red stone or powder that can do two incredible things. The first is the one that gets all the press. Chrysopoeia, the transmutation of base metals into pure, shimmering gold. Imagine the power. No more taxes, no more debt. You could fund armies, build palaces, buy anything and anyone you desired. This is the promise that tempts kings and bankrupts nobles. It's the practical, greedy, and understandable hook of alchemy. But as you watch the alchemist's face, etched with lines of sleeplessness and hope, you sense he's after the second prize, the greater prize. The stone is also said to be the key ingredient for the elixir of life, a potion that can cure any disease, reverse aging, and grant the drinker a lifespan stretching into the hundreds or maybe even thousands of years. Immortality, not just wealth, but time. The time to learn all the universe's secrets, to watch empires rise and fall, to never say goodbye to yourself in the mirror. This is the true, beating heart of the alchemical quest. It's a desperate rebellion against the one certainty of human existence, death. You look around the lab again. This isn't just chemistry. It's a spiritual battleground. On one wall, you see a detailed astrological chart, mapping the movements of the planets. Alchemists believed that cosmic energies influenced their work. An experiment begun when Mars was ascendant would have a different outcome than one started under the sway of Venus. Next to it is a woodcut of an Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, symbolizing eternity and the cyclical nature of the work, destruction and creation, over and over again. Everything here is symbolic. Nothing is what it seems. A recipe might call for the blood of the red lion or the tears of the virgin. But these are just code names for chemical substances. Probably. It's this deliberate obscurity that makes the history so fascinating and so frustrating. Alchemists wrote this way to protect their secrets from the unworthy, the greedy, and the Church, which often viewed their work with deep suspicion. The result is that their notes read less like a lab manual and more like a fever dream. A really smelly fever dream. There's a mainstream historical idea that alchemy was simply proto-chemistry, a fumbling first attempt at science that we eventually outgrew. And in a way, that's true. They developed distillation, sublimation, and created new alloys and acids. But to see it only that way is to miss the point. Look at the Alchemists' bookshelf. Next to a scroll on metallurgy is a text on Gnostic spirituality. Next to a diagram of a distillation train is a commentary on the works of Plato. Historians still argue whether alchemy began as a purely practical craft of metalworking, or if it was, from its very inception, a spiritual discipline veiled in chemical language. Was the goal really to turn lead into gold? Or was the lead a symbol for the alchemist's own unenlightened soul, and the gold a symbol for spiritual perfection and unity with the divine? The beauty is that for most of these figures, it was both at the same time. The physical and the spiritual were inseparable. Purifying metals was a way of purifying the soul, and vice versa. You notice a particularly strange drawing tucked into a half-open book. It depicts a tiny, perfectly formed human being gestating inside a glass flask. This is the homunculus, a quirky and deeply strange fringe belief for some alchemists. The theory was that with the right combination of human seed, heat, and, well, other unsavory ingredients, one could create a miniature, artificial person. It speaks to the sheer ambition of the art, the desire not just to perfect nature, but to bypass it entirely, to become a creator in her own right. It's an ambition that borders on a truly epic level of hubris. You shudder and decide it's probably best not to ask what's in all of those bubbling flasks. For tonight, it's enough to stand here, in the shadows, and feel the immense weight of this twin dream, to conquer wealth and to conquer death. This burning desire, this all-consuming quest to cheat death, wasn't born in the damp, gloomy cellars of medieval Europe. For its earliest, grandest, and perhaps most tragic expression, you must travel much further back in time, and much further to the east. The air around you changes. The scent of sulfur and charcoal fades, replaced by the sweet, heavy perfume of sandalwood incense and blooming peonies. You are now in ancient China, around 220 BCE, in the court of a man who didn't he just want to find the elixir of life, he wanted to command it into existence. You are in the presence of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. This is a man of breathtaking ambition and terrifying power. He is the one who will end the centuries of conflict known as the Warring States period, forging a single mighty empire from the ashes. This is a mainstream historical fact, the kind of thing you learn in a textbook. He standardized weights, measures, currency, and even the written language, laying the groundwork for 2 millennia of Chinese dynastic rule. But as you stand in the silent throngs of his court, you feel the other side of that power. It's a chilling, paranoid energy. Every official is watched. Every whisper is noted. The emperor's obsession with order extends to everything, including the one thing no one can control, the natural cycle of life and death. He cannot accept that his reign, his life, will simply end. It is an imperfection in an otherwise perfect system of his own design. And so, he has turned the vast resources of his new empire toward a single goal, achieving immortality. He sends out vast fleets under the command of court sorcerers. One, led by a man named Su Fu, is dispatched into the eastern seas with thousands of young men and women. Their mission? To find the mythical island of Penghai, a land where the 8 immortals are said to dwell, and to bring back the fungi of immortality from its shores. The fleet, of course, never returns. Some say it was shipwrecked. Others whisper they found a new land, perhaps. Japan had decided that starting a new colony was a better career move than returning, empty-handed to a notoriously impatient emperor. Back at the palace, the emperor's alchemists and physicians are working on a more direct approach. In Chinese alchemy, the key substance isn't some undiscovered herb from a mythical island. It's a mineral pulled from the earth. You see it on a silk-draped table, a pile of brilliant blood-red stones. This is cinnabar. To the Chinese alchemists, its properties were magical. Its color was the color of life, of blood, of imperial power. But its real magic was revealed with heat. When roasted, cinnabar releases its soul, a silvery, shimmering, liquid metal that seems to move with a life of its own. Quicksilver, mercury, the logic to them was inescapable. Cinnabar, with its eternal red color, was a substance that did not decay. Mercury, its essence, was a metal that was somehow alive. Surely, by consuming these immortal substances, a person could absorb their deathless properties. It was a form of sympathetic magic. You are what you eat, taken to its most extreme and dangerous conclusion. So, under the guidance of his most trusted alchemists, the emperor begins his treatment. He starts taking small, polished pills, compounded from pure, refined mercury and other minerals. He believes he is purifying his body, earning away the mortal dross to leave behind a golden, eternal core. Each pill is a promise of another sunrise, another year, another century on the dragon throne. But you, with your modern knowledge, watch in silent horror. You know what mercury does to the human body. As the weeks turn into months, you see the change. The emperor's famous paranoia deepens into delusion. His temper, already fearsome, becomes wildly unpredictable. He suffers from memory loss, insomnia, and tremors. His internal organs are slowly, inexorably shutting down. The very elixir he believes is preserving his life is, in fact, the poison that is systematically destroying him. It's a tragedy of cosmic proportions. The most powerful man on earth, a man who built the Great Wall, is being killed by his own desperate hope. Of course, even a man convinced he's becoming a god needs a backup plan. And Qin Shi Huang's backup plan was, to put it mildly, a bit extra. In the earth near his capital, he commanded the construction of the most elaborate tomb complex ever conceived. It's a subterranean palace, a complete model of his empire, designed to serve him in the afterlife should the elixir fail. And to guard it, he commissioned an entire army made of terracotta. Thousands upon thousands of life-sized soldiers, archers, and charioteers, each with a unique, individual face, stand in silent, eternal formation. This is his bid for immortality. Plan B, and here lies a quirky, almost unbelievable detail from the historical records of the great Han Dynasty historian, Sima Qian. He wrote that within the sealed central tomb, a map of China was laid out, and its great rivers, the Yangtze and the Yellow River, were recreated in channels of pure, flowing mercury, designed to circulate mechanically forever. For centuries, this was thought to be a flight of fancy. But modern scientific surveys of the soil around the still unexcavated tomb mound have revealed astoundingly high concentrations of mercury, lending eerie credibility to the ancient account. The thought of a silent, underground world with rivers of poison is a chilling final image of his obsession. Historians still argue whether Qin Shi Huang genuinely believed these mercury pills were a viable elixir, or if he was a desperate man hedging his bets, pursuing every possible path to immortality simultaneously. Was he a true believer in his alchemists, or a pragmatist who simply left no stone or terracotta soldier unturned? Either way, the irony is crushing. He died at the age of 49, likely from mercury poisoning, while on a tour of his empire, searching for, you guessed it, the elixir of life. His advisors, fearing a revolt, kept his death a secret, even going so far as to load carts of rotting fish onto the imperial convoy to mask the smell of the emperor's decaying body. He achieved a kind of immortality. It's true. His name is known across the world. But his story is not one of triumph over death, but a grim warning about how the fear of it can lead you straight into its arms. You leave the scent of sandalwood and mercury behind, traveling westward now, across deserts and seas, across centuries. You're moving toward the other great cradle of alchemy, the one that would give birth to the Western tradition. You find yourself in a place of cultural fusion, a bustling, cosmopolitan city, where the mysticism of the Egyptian priesthood collides with the rigorous logic of Greek philosophy. Welcome to Hellenistic Egypt, likely Alexandria, around the 1st or 2nd century, and the air here smells of papyrus, sea salt, and the spices pouring in from a dozen different trade routes. Here, the quest for the elixir and the philosopher's stone takes on a different flavor. In China, the pursuit was often a state-sponsored imperial project. Here, it's more secretive, more philosophical, more tied to mystery cults and Gnostic sects who believed the material world was a prison for the divine spark within. Salvation for them wasn't about preserving the physical body, but about liberating the soul. And alchemy was one of the keys to that liberation. The practical art of the Egyptian metalworkers and dye makers, a craft they called Kumaya, possibly from an old word for black earth, in reference to the fertile Nile silt, was being infused with a new, spiritual purpose. At the heart of this new, mystical alchemy stands a figure shrouded in legend. He is not a king or an emperor, but a fusion of gods. He is Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes the Thrice Great. This legendary figure was a syncretic combination of the Greek god Hermes, the messenger, the trickster, the guide to the underworld, and the Egyptian god Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom, writing, and magic. For the alchemists of Alexandria, Hermes Trismegistus was not just a god to be worshipped. He was the first alchemist, the original master who had inscribed all the secrets of the cosmos onto a single legendary artifact. And that is what you've come here to find. You pass through the grand library of Alexandria, or what's left of it, a center of learning for the entire known world, and enter a dusty chamber filled with scrolls. An old man with a long gray beard, a follower of the Hermetic arts, unrolls a piece of papyrus for you. It's a copy of a copy of a copy, but he claims it's a faithful transcription of the original. He tells you the legend, that the original text was found by Alexander, the Great himself, or perhaps by Apollonius of Tyana, clutched in the hands of Hermes Trismegistus' mummy in a hidden tomb beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza. The artifact itself was said to be a single massive slab of emerald or green crystal, upon which the entire philosophy of alchemy was carved. This is the famous Emerald Tablet. You lean in to read the words. They are not a chemical recipe. They are a cryptic, poetic, and deeply confusing riddle. It begins with the famous declaration of cosmic unity. That which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. This single sentence becomes the foundational mantra of all Western alchemy. It means that the universe is not a collection of separate things, but a single interconnected organism. The macrocosm of the heavens is reflected in the microcosm of the earth, and in the human body itself. To understand one, you must understand the other. The movements of the planets, the growth of a plant, the rusting of iron, and the thoughts in your own mind are all part of the same grand, unified process. As you continue to read, the text becomes even more obscure. It speaks of the sun as its father, the moon as its mother. The wind hath carried it in its belly. The earth is its nurse. It talks of separating the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly and with great industry. It concludes with a triumphant boast. Herein is the strength of the strong, for it overcometh every subtle thing, and doth penetrate every solid substance. So was the world created. You finish reading and look up at the old man, completely baffled. This is it? This is the master plan for making gold and living forever? It sounds more like a poem written by a lunatic. Where are the instructions? Where are the measurements? The old man just smiles. He explains that the tablet is not a set of instructions, but a focus for meditation. Its truths cannot be understood intellectually. They must be experienced. The one thing it speaks of is the prima materia, the first matter, the chaotic, undifferentiated substance from which the entire universe was created. The alchemist's great work, the magnum opus, is to find this prima materia in the world. Some thought it was let others do others' dirt, and then guide it through a process of purification that mimics the original creation of the cosmos. By separating the elements, purifying them, and recombining them in a perfect state, the alchemist could create the philosopher's stone, the ultimate expression of that one thing. This brings us to a mainstream historical point: the influence of Greek philosophy, particularly Aristotle, on this early alchemy. Aristotle taught that all matter was composed of four elements: earth, water, air, and fire, and four qualities: hot, cold, wet, and dry. A substance like lead was considered a combination of these elements and qualities. By changing the proportions, say by adding more fire and air, you could theoretically transform it into gold, which was seen as a more perfect combination. The Emerald Tablet provided the mystical framework, and Aristotle provided the physical theory. Now for a quirky tidbit. The name of the game in Hellenistic Alexandria was secrecy and authenticity. To give their texts more clout, alchemical writers often used pseudonyms, attributing their work to famous figures of the past like Moses, Cleopatra, or even the Gnostic apostle Mary the Jewess. Mary the Jewess is actually credited with inventing several key pieces of alchemical equipment. Her most famous invention is a double boiler, a device for gentle, even heating. To this day, a double boiler in a kitchen is known in French as a bain-marie, or Mary's bath, a direct, unbroken line back to one of these semi-mythical alchemists. Historians still argue about the very existence of the physical Emerald Tablet. Was it a real artifact that has since been lost to time, perhaps destroyed in one of the many fires that plagued the Library of Alexandria? Or was it always a piece of literary fiction, a channeled text created by an unknown Alexandrian mystic to give their philosophical system the weight of ancient authority? No one knows for sure. No archaeological evidence for it has ever been found, but in a way, it doesn't matter. Real or not, the idea of the Emerald Tablet was profoundly influential. Its dozen or so lines of cryptic wisdom echoed through the secret labs of the Islamic world, the Gothic monasteries of Europe, and even the studies of Isaac Newton. It was the seed from which a vast and thorny tree of Western alchemy would grow, and its central message, as above, so below, would haunt the dreams of alchemists for the next 1,500 years. You remain in the intellectual melting pot of Hellenistic Egypt, but you move forward in time, a century or two, to around 300 AD, the philosophical whispers of Hermes Trismegistus and the Emerald Tablet are now coalescing into a more defined practice. You're about to meet one of the first alchemists whose name and writings have survived the ravages of time, a man who gives a face, albeit a strange and tortured one, to this emerging art. His name is Zosimos of Panopolis. He is not a legend or a god figure. He is a man, a scholar, and by the sound of his work, a very troubled one at that. You find him not in a grand library, but in what feels like a grotto, a dark room where the only light comes from the hungry maw of a furnace. The air is thick with the metallic tongue of vaporized arsenic and mercury. Zosimos is a Gnostic Christian, and for him, alchemy is not just a craft or a philosophy. It's a religious experience, a path to spiritual revelation, or gnosis. He believes that human souls are divine sparks trapped in the darkness of the material world, put here by a lesser, flawed creator god. The great work, the alchemical process, is a ritual of redemption. It's a way to free the spirit from the prison of the flesh, just as the alchemist frees the spirit of a metal from its crude ore. Zosimos is most famous for his books, which were collected under the title Shirok Meta, or Things Made by Hand. But these are not simple lab manuals. They are a bizarre mix of practical recipes, philosophical treatises, and vivid, terrifying accounts of his dreams and visions. It is these visions that truly set him apart. You imagine him slumping over his workbench, after days without sleep, his mind steeped in chemical fumes and esoteric texts, and drifting into a waking nightmare. He describes one of these visions to you, his voice low and intense. In his dream, he stands on a high place, overlooking a large, bowl-shaped altar. At the bottom of the altar, a priest named Ion stands there, but he seems to be in a trance. Then Ion speaks, and his words are chilling. I am Ion, the priest of the inner sanctuaries, and I submit myself to an unendurable torment. As Zosimos watches, Ion is dismembered with a sword. His body is chopped to pieces, and then the pieces are thrown onto the altar, where they are consumed by fire until they transform into a spiritual body. In another part of the vision, he sees the same priest being boiled alive, all the while screaming, "The fire is eating my flesh, and my bones are being calcined. This is the unendurable torment that I must undergo to become spirit." You listen, horrified. This isn't the calm, meditative wisdom of the Emerald Tablet. This is brutal, violent, and deeply disturbing. Yet to Zosimos, it's profoundly symbolic. The tormented priest represents the prima materia, the base substance of the alchemical work. The dismemberment, boiling, and burning represent the chemical processes of solutio and calcinatio. The substance must be ritually killed and broken down into its fundamental components before it can be resurrected in a new, perfected form. This is the core alchemical concept of solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. Break it down, then build it back up better than before. The violence of his visions reflects the violence of the chemical reactions happening in his flasks. This brings you to a mainstream historical understanding of this period. The alchemists of late antiquity were obsessed with the symbolism of death and resurrection. This theme resonated powerfully with various belief systems of the time, from the story of Osiris in Egyptian mythology to the Passion of Christ in Christianity. Alchemy provided a physical, hands-on way to participate in this cosmic drama. Every time an alchemist heated a metal until it turned to black ash, they were participating in the death of the old world. And when they finally saw a flash of iridescent color, or the pure white of a purified substance, they were witnessing its rebirth. Now for a quirky fringe tidbit about the tools of the trade. Remember Mary the Jewess and her bain-marie? Zosimos describes even more specialized and complex equipment. He is one of the earliest writers to provide detailed diagrams of distillation apparatus. He describes the tribicos, a type of alembic with 3 spouts, allowing the alchemist to collect 3 different distillates at once. But his most curious contribution is a device called a kerotakis. Essentially, it was a sealed container with a pallet suspended near the top. The alchemist would place thin sheets of metal on the pallet. At the bottom of the container, he would heat a substance like sulfur or mercury. The vapors would rise, condense at the top, and then run down the walls, coating and reacting with the metal sheets on the pallet over a long period. The whole device was meant to replicate the natural processes that form minerals deep within the earth, but on an accelerated timescale. It was a kind of miniature, artificial volcano designed for creating new alloys and colored patinas on metals, which was a huge part of the early goal of making things look like gold. As you can imagine from the nature of his writings, historians still argue fiercely over the mental state of Zosimos. Was he a brilliant mystic using vivid psychological imagery to explain complex chemical and spiritual processes? Or was he suffering from the effects of his own experiments? The constant exposure to toxic heavy metal vapors, especially mercury and arsenic, is known to cause hallucinations, paranoia, and severe psychological distress. This is a condition known as Mad Hatter disease, famously associated with the mercury used in hat making. It's entirely possible that Zosimos's terrifying visions weren't just symbolic allegories, but the literal waking nightmares of a man slowly poisoning himself in his relentless pursuit of gnosis. His legacy, however, is undeniable. Zosimos took the vague, philosophical maxims of Hermes and grounded them in a real, albeit bizarre, laboratory practice. He established the core symbolism of death, purification, and rebirth that would define Western alchemy for the next millennium. His visions, whether products of spiritual insight or chemical madness, gave the great work a powerful psychological depth. He showed that the alchemist's journey wasn't just about changing metals. It was about confronting the terrifying, transformative, and often painful process of changing oneself. Standing in his fume-filled grotto, you understand that this path to immortality is not for the faint of heart. It is a path that leads through darkness, torment, and fire. The flickering flames of Zosimos's furnace gutter and die. The Roman Empire, the great vessel that held the cultures of Greece and Egypt, fractures and falls apart in the West. For centuries, Europe enters a period of turmoil and intellectual decline. The complex arts of the alchemist are largely forgotten, the precious texts lost or locked away in remote monasteries. But the spirit of Hermes and Zosimos did not die. It merely migrated. You travel forward in time again to the 8th century and find yourself in a world bursting with intellectual energy and scientific curiosity. You are in the heart of the burgeoning Islamic Empire, in one of its great centers of learning, like Baghdad or Damascus. The atmosphere here is a stark contrast to the secretive, dream-haunted grotto of Zosimos. You are in the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, a legendary library and academy in Baghdad. The air hums with scholarly debate. Here, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian scholars work side by side, translating the great works of the Greeks Plato, Aristotle, Euclid into Arabic. And among the texts they eagerly seek out are the cryptic writings of the Alexandrian alchemists. But the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age were not content to simply preserve the ancient knowledge. They sought to test it, refine it, and build upon it. They brought a new, rigorous spirit of empiricism to the art. This is where you meet the man considered the father of Islamic alchemy, and by some, the father of chemistry itself. Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West by his Latinized name, Geber. Like Hermes Trismegistus, Jabir is a semi-legendary figure. A massive body of over 3,000 texts is attributed to him, covering everything from cosmology and medicine to, of course, alchemy. Historians today believe that this vast collection was likely the work of a whole school of anonymous alchemists, writing under his prestigious name over a period of 100 years or more, the Jabirian corpus. But the ideas within that corpus are what truly matter. Jabir, or the school of Jabir, takes the old Greek theory of 4 elements and adds a new layer of complexity. You watch a robed scholar in the House of Wisdom explaining it on a chalkboard, a luxury Zosimos never had. He draws the 4 elements, fire, earth, air, water, but then he explains that these elements combine to form 2 essential chemical principles, sulfur and mercury. This is the sulfur-mercury theory, a cornerstone of Islamic and later European alchemy. It's crucial to understand that they didn't mean literal, common sulfur and mercury. Sulfur was the principle of combustibility, of soul, of oiliness and fire. Mercury was the principle of fusibility, of spirit, of metallicity, and wateriness. According to Jabir, every metal was composed of these 2 principles in different ratios and degrees of purity. Lead, for example, was full of impure sulfur and mercury. Gold was a perfectly balanced and pure combination of the 2. This new theory had a profound implication. transmutation was not just possible, it was logical. If all metals are made of the same two basic ingredients, then to turn lead into gold, all you have to do is find a way to remove the impurities and adjust the balance. The agent for this rebalancing act was, of course, the legendary elixir, which they called Elixir in Arabic, from which our word is derived. This theoretical framework transformed alchemy from a mystical art into something that looked much more like a systematic science. And this leads to a critical MAINSTREAM historical fact about the Islamic Golden Age, the emphasis on practical experimentation. The Jabirian texts are filled with detailed instructions for chemical procedures. They describe crystallization, filtration, and distillation, with a clarity that was absent from the deliberately obscure writings of the Hellenistic period. Jabir is credited with the invention of the alembic still, a key piece of equipment for producing distilled water, acids, and alcohol. He provides recipes for creating steel, dyeing cloth, and even making a primitive form of waterproofing to prevent forgery. He's looking for the elixir, yes, but along the way, he and his followers are discovering and documenting the basic building blocks of chemistry. No more blood of the red lion. Now it's heat the red powder until it gives off a silver spirit. It's a huge step forward. But even with this new scientific rigor, the world of Islamic alchemy was still wonderfully weird. For a quirky tidbit, let's talk about takwin, the Islamic equivalent of creating a homunculus. The Jabirian corpus contains detailed, if completely baffling, recipes for creating life itself in the laboratory. The goal was to create not just humans, but animals and even plants through alchemical means. It involved combining minerals and animal parts in a vessel, controlling the influence of the planets, and then incubating the mixture for a specific time. The texts claim that by mastering this art, the alchemist could not just imitate nature, but surpass it. It was seen as the absolute pinnacle of alchemical skill, proof that the practitioner truly understood the divine secrets of creation. Needless to say, there's no evidence anyone ever successfully created a laboratory-grown scorpion, which is probably for the best. As with so many of these ancient figures, historians still argue about the true nature of Jabir's work. Was he primarily a practical chemist whose spiritual and mystical elements were added by his later followers? Or was the entire Jabirian corpus, from the very beginning, a spiritual allegory disguised as chemistry in the same vein as Zosimo's? This debate, known as the Geber question, is a classic chicken and egg problem. Did the science give rise to the mysticism, or did the mysticism drive the science? The texts support both interpretations. They are full of precise chemical instructions on one page and baffling numerological symbolism and astrological references on the next dot. What is certain is that the work of Jabir and his school was a vital bridge. They took the chaotic, dreamlike alchemy of Alexandria, systematized it, and gave it a rational, theoretical framework. They meticulously documented their experiments and invented new apparatus. When their writings were eventually translated from Arabic into Latin in the 12th century, they arrived in Europe like a thunderclap. They reintroduced a Europe just emerging from the Dark Ages to its own forgotten classical past, but supercharged with a new spirit of scientific inquiry. The stage was now set for the great flowering of alchemy in the medieval West, and for the rise of figures who would become legends in their own right. You could almost feel the knowledge traveling, a whisper, passing from Alexandria to Baghdad, and now, finally, to the chilly scriptoriums of Paris and Bologna. The center of alchemical fervor shifts once again. You leave the sun-drenched courtyards of Baghdad and travel to the damp, gray cobblestones of late medieval Paris. It's the late 14th century, a city of soaring Gothic cathedrals and teeming narrow streets. The knowledge preserved and advanced by Jabir Ibn Hayyan has now been translated into Latin and is circulating among the scholars and clerics of Europe. The quest for the Philosopher's Stone is no longer a half-forgotten whisper from Egypt. It's a burning obsession, and its most famous European practitioner is not a priest or a nobleman, but a humble public scribe. You find your way to a small house near the Cemetery of the Innocents. Inside, a man is hunched over a desk, not bubbling retorts, but carefully copying manuscripts for a living. This is Nicholas Flamel. By all official accounts, he was a real person, a successful scrivener and manuscript seller who, along with his wife Perenelle, became a wealthy philanthropist, endowing churches, hospitals, and hostels throughout Paris. He lived a long and pious life, dying in 1418, a perfectly ordinary, respectable story. But according to the legend that springs up around him a century after his death, his great wealth came not from his ink-stained fingers, but from a secret, much more glittering, source. The story, as it's told, begins one night with a dream. An angel appears to Flamel, holding a beautiful and ancient book. "Flamel," the angel says, "look well at this book. You will not understand it at all, but one day you will see in it that which no other man has been able to see." Flamel reaches for it, but the angel and the book vanish. The dream haunts him. Then, one day, a stranger comes to his shop, desperate for money. He has a manuscript to sell, and as soon as Flamel sees it, he freezes. It's the very same book from his dream. It is large and very old, with a cover of finely wrought copper, engraved with strange symbols and Greek letters. Its pages, he notes, are not paper or parchment, but made from the bark of young trees. Flamel buys the book for 2 florins. He immediately recognizes it as a lost text of immense importance. The title page identifies it as the Book of Abraham. The Jew, prince, priest, Levite, astrologer, and philosopher. Flamel spends the next 21 years of his life trying to decipher it. The text itself is written in a clear hand, but it's a cryptic alchemical allegory, full of talk of sacrificing infants and watering flowers with the blood of red dragons. The real key, Flamel believes, lies in the illustrations. The book contains a series of 7 beautifully drawn images, each depicted twice. They show things like a serpent crucifying another, a desert with serpents swallowing rods, and a king with a scimitar ordering his soldiers to kill babies whose mothers weep at his feet. It's like a more gruesome version of Zosimos's visions. Flamel is stumped. He shows the drawings to the learned men of Paris, but they can't help him. He realizes he needs to find someone from the Jewish community who might understand the mystical traditions from which the book supposedly came. This is a mainstream historical fact. At this time, Jews had been officially expelled from Paris, so Flamel had to travel. He tells his wife he's going on a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. On the return journey, he meets a learned Jewish convert named Canchis, who recognizes the drawings as belonging to the esoteric tradition of the Kabbalah and begins to translate the secrets for him. Tragically, Canchis falls ill and dies before they can return to Paris, but he has given Flamel the final key. Armed with this new understanding, Flamel rushes back to his little workshop. He and his wife, Perenelle, who the legend insists was his equal partner in the great work, set about following the book's instructions. The legend claims that on January 17, 1382, at noon, they succeeded. Following the book's recipe, they projected a small amount of the Philosopher's Stone onto 1/2 pound of molten mercury, and it instantly transmuted into pure, shining silver. A few months later, they repeated the experiment with lead, and this time produced gold of a quality better than common gold. The legend says they performed this feat 3 times, and the immense wealth they gained was used for their famous acts of charity. They lived modestly, content in their knowledge, and of course, they used the stone to create the elixir of life. The story goes that they faked their own deaths in tombs, A quirky fringe detail claims that Flamel's tomb was later broken into by treasure hunters who found it empty, and that they wander the earth to this day, immortal. Sightings of Nicholas Flamel have been reported throughout the centuries, from a 17th century traveler who claimed to have met him in India, to an 18th century abbot who said he saw Flamel at the Paris Opera Dot. It's a fantastic story, but historians still argue whether there is any truth to it at all. The entire legend of Flamel the Alchemist comes from a single book, Les Livres des Figures Hiéroglyphiques, published in 1612, nearly 200 years after his death, but claiming to be written by Flamel himself. Is it Flamel's genuine secret journal, passed down through a hidden chain of initiates? Or is it a clever forgery, a piece of alchemical propaganda written by a later practitioner who attached Flamel's famous and respectable name to it to give his own theories more credibility? The vast majority of scholars today land firmly in the forgery camp. They point out that Flamel's actual documented wealth can be easily explained by his successful career as a scribe and property owner in a booming Paris, combined with his wife's 2 previous wealthy marriages. There's no need to invoke a magical stone. Yet the legend is so powerful. It's the ultimate alchemical fantasy. He wasn't a king, a mad mystic, or a secretive scholar. He was an ordinary man, a craftsman who through piety, patience, and a bit of divine luck unlocked the universe's greatest secret. He represents the hope that this incredible power isn't reserved for the elite, but can be found by anyone with a pure heart and a keen mind. His story codifies the image of the European alchemist, a secretive, devout, and brilliant man working in a hidden attic lab, quietly achieving the impossible. As you stand in the imagined shadow of his workshop, you can feel the allure. You can understand why, true or not, the story of Nicholas Flamel became one of the most enduring and beloved tales in the entire history of the quest for eternal life. You've seen the great ambitions of emperors, the cryptic philosophies of mystics, and the legendary successes of scribes. But now it's time to get your hands dirty. You step away from the grand theories and into the messy, reeking reality of the alchemist's laboratory in its European heyday, somewhere around the 15th or 16th century. This isn't the gleaming, sterile environment of a modern chemistry lab. This is part kitchen, part blacksmith's forge, and part occult temple. Forget safety goggles and fume hoods. The closest thing you have to personal protective equipment is a leather apron and a prayer. The first thing that hits you is the smell. It's an almost indescribable assault on the senses. There's the ever-present bite of sulfur and arsenic, the sharp tang of vinegar being boiled down to a powerful acid, and the acrid smoke of the charcoal-fired furnace, the athanor, which must be kept burning at a steady heat for months on end. Layered on top of that is the unmistakable, ammonia-rich stench of stale urine, mountains of it, collected and left to putrefy for weeks. And beneath it all is the faint, unsettlingly sweet scent of decaying organic madder egg whites, blood, bone, and even hair, all of which were considered vital ingredients by various alchemical schools. It's the kind of smell that clings to your clothes and hair for days. You look around at the raw materials, the prima materia in its many mundane and disgusting forms. The alchemists believed the key to the great work was hidden in the vilest, most rejected substances. In stercoring venator, they whispered, in filth it is found. So you see buckets of dung. Horse dung was prized for its slow, steady heat when composted, casks of human and animal blood, and heaps of bone and eggshells waiting to be calcined into a fine white powder. And the urine, so much urine. Some alchemists believed it contained a vital life force, a salty, fiery spirit that was essential for the initial stages of the work. They would boil it down, gallon by gallon, into a thick, syrupy concentrate, a process that must have made them wildly unpopular with their neighbors. It's a light joke to us, but imagine being the person living downwind of an alchemist who's just received a fresh shipment from the local barracks. Now, you turn your attention to the mineral and metallic ingredients. On a heavy wooden table, you see lumps of lead ore, the lena, brittle sticks of antimony, reddish chunks of cinnabar, still a favorite after all these centuries, and brilliant yellow crystals of sulfur. Arsenic, in its various sulfide forms, like orpiment and realder, adds splashes of bright yellow and orange. These substances were known as the dragons or the serpents because of their volatile and poisonous nature. The alchemists' job was to tame them, to kill their metallic bodies with powerful acids in order to release their purer, spiritual essence. To do this, they needed solvents. You see large glass carboys filled with acids that would have been marvels of the age. There's sulfuric acid, which they called oil of vitriol, created by roasting green iron sulfate crystals. There's nitric acid, or aqua fortis, strong water, which could dissolve silver and most other metals. And then there's the king of them all, aqua regia, or royal water. This was a fearsome mixture of nitric and hydrochloric acid, made from salt and vitriol, famous for being one of the only substances that could dissolve gold itself. This was a mainstream historical discovery of immense importance to both alchemy and later chemistry. The ability to dissolve gold was seen as a key step. If you could reduce the perfect metal to a liquid state, surely you could then use that liquid to leaven other, lesser metals and raise them to perfection. As you get your hands on the materials, you encounter some genuinely bizarre, fringe beliefs about their properties. Take antimony. This metalloid was a key ingredient for many alchemists. When purified, its crystalline form often has a beautiful, star-like pattern on its surface, which they called the star regulus. They saw this as a sign, a stamp from the heavens, that antimony was intimately connected to the microcosm-macrocosm relationship described on the emerald tablet. A popular and exceedingly quirky medical treatment involved antimony cups. These were small cups made from the metal itself. A person would pour wine into the cup and let it sit overnight. The wine would absorb trace amounts of the antimony, becoming a powerful emetic, in other words, a vomit inducer of legendary ferocity. People would use these cups over and over, believing they were purging their bodies of ill humors. It was a family heirloom that made the whole family violently ill together. Fun. The work itself was painstakingly slow. A single process could take a year or more, following the cyclical rhythm of the seasons. The alchemist would grind his materials into a fine powder, mix them with a liquid like wine or distilled vinegar, and seal them in a glass flask with a long neck, called a hermetic seal, after Hermes Trismegistus himself. This flask, the philosopher's egg, would then be placed in the gentle heat of the Athanor. The goal was to watch the matter inside cycle through a series of color changes, the traditional signs of progress. First, the nigredo, or blackening out, stage of putrefaction and death. Then the albedo, or whitening, a washing and purification. Next came the citronitis, a yellowing, and finally, the rubedo, the reddening, which signaled the birth of the philosopher's stone. Of course, things often went wrong. Historians still argue about the frequency and cause of laboratory accidents in the alchemical era. With open flames, volatile chemicals, and glass vessels heated under pressure, explosions were a constant threat. An overheated retort could burst, spraying the alchemist with boiling acid or toxic metal salts. The fumes alone were a slow-acting poison. Mercury, lead, and arsenic vapors would lead to nerve damage, madness, and organ failure. It was a genuinely hazardous profession. The quest for eternal life was, ironically, very likely to shorten the one you already had. Every day in the lab was a gamble, a step into a world of acrid smells, beautiful theories, and very real dangers. You wipe the grime from your hands and feel a new respect for the sheer, stubborn dedication it took to brave this hazardous kitchen day after day. You've endured the stench and the danger of the anonymous alchemist's workshop, a place of tradition and secrecy. But now, you step out into the bright, tumultuous world of the early 16th century, the height of the Reformation, and you meet an alchemist who is anything but anonymous. This man is a whirlwind of ego, intellect, and righteous fury. He is a physician, a botanist, a theologian, and a revolutionary who sought to tear down the entire edifice of ancient medicine and rebuild it on the foundations of alchemy. His name is Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, but you can call him Paracelsus. The name he gave himself says it all. It means equal to or greater than Celsus, a famous Roman encyclopedist on medicine. This was not a man plagued by self-doubt. You first see him in the city of Basel, Switzerland, in 1527. He's just been appointed the city physician and a professor at the university, much to the horror of the established faculty. He doesn't look like a scholar. He's often dressed like a vagabond, preferring the company of barbers, executioners, and miners to that of academics. He refuses to lecture in Latin, the universal language of scholarship, choosing instead to teach in the common German tongue so that ordinary people can understand him. And on his first day of class, he does something truly theatrical. He builds a bonfire in the university courtyard, and in front of a crowd of stunned students and professors, he throws the most respected medical texts of the age into the flames. Works of Galen and Avicenna, the pillars of medicine for over 1,000 years. He declares their knowledge to be nothing but sterile dogma. The true learning, he bellows, comes not from books, but from the book of nature itself. And the key to reading that book is alchemy. For Paracelsus, alchemy wasn't primarily about making gold. That was a fool's errand for the greedy puffers. As he called them, the true purpose of alchemy was medicine. He called this new art iatrochemistry, or chemical medicine. This is a mainstream historical point. Paracelsus is a pivotal figure in the history of medicine because he championed the use of specific, chemically prepared remedies for specific diseases. Before him, medicine was dominated by the theory of humors, the idea that illness was caused by an imbalance of 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Treatment consisted of trying to rebalance them through bleeding, purging, and dietary changes. Paracelsus thought this was nonsense. He adapted the old sulfur-mercury theory of Jabir and added a third principle, salt, for Paracelsus. These were the trier prima, the 3 primal substances that made up everything, including the human body. Sulfur represented the soul and the combustible part of a substance. Mercury represented the spirit and the volatile, watery part. And salt represented the body, the solid, non-combustible part. Health, in his view, was the proper balance of these 3 alchemical principles within the body. Sickness was a localized imbalance, an intruder that needed to be attacked directly. If your body lacked a certain kind of sulfur, you needed to take a medicine that contained a pure, alchemically prepared form of that principle. It was a revolutionary idea, treating illness with targeted chemicals instead of broad, systemic adjustments. You follow him into his lab, which is just as messy as the last one, but the focus is different. He's not trying to turn lead into gold. He's trying to turn poisons into cures. He is obsessed with the metals of the old alchemists' antimony, arsenic, and mercury, but he believes that they can be detoxified and transformed into powerful medicines. His most famous saying sums up his entire philosophy. All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. The dosage alone makes it so a thing is not a poison. This is the foundational concept of modern toxicology. He believed that if you could use alchemy to separate the pure, medicinal essence of a toxic substance from its gross, poisonous body, you could create a potent remedy. He creates a medicine called laudanum from opium, a powerful painkiller that would be used for centuries. He pioneers the use of mercury compounds to treat syphilis, a devastating plague of the era. This treatment was highly toxic and often killed the patient, but in an age with no other options, it was seen as a desperate hope. He was, in essence, one of the forefathers of chemotherapy, fighting disease by introducing a targeted poison into the body. Of course, a man this radical was bound to have some very strange ideas. For a truly quirky Paracelsian tidbit, let's look at his belief in the archaeus, a kind of internal alchemist that he believed resided in the stomach of every person. The archaeus was a spiritual force, a vital principle that was responsible for separating the nutritious, good parts of food from the poisonous, waste parts. When the archaeus was weak or functioning improperly, a person got sick. Therefore, the goal of a Paracelsian physician was to create medicines that would support and assist the archaeus in its work. He also believed in all sorts of elemental beings, gnomes for the earth, undines for water, sylphs for air, and salamanders for fire. He wrote about them with the same scientific certainty as he wrote about metallurgy. For Paracelsus, the spiritual and the physical were woven together, so tightly they were one and the same. Historians still argue about Paracelsus's true legacy. Was he a forward-thinking scientific genius who single-handedly dragged medicine out of the Dark Ages? Or was he a lucky, arrogant quack whose theories were just as mystical and unproven as the ones he burned? The truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle. His theory of the trio primo was wrong, but his emphasis on observation, experimentation, and specific chemical remedies was a monumental step forward. He was cantankerous, egotistical, and almost certainly a functioning alcoholic, who famously dictated his books to his students while roaring drunk. He was kicked out of Basel after less than a year for offending basically everyone in a position of authority. He spent the rest of his life as a wandering physician, a restless, brilliant, and deeply flawed man, but his impact was seismic. He tore a hole in the fabric of traditional knowledge, and through that hole, a new kind of inquiry began to emerge. He positioned alchemy as the queen of the sciences, the master key not just to wealth or long life, but to understanding the very nature of health and disease. He failed to find the elixir of life, dying at the relatively young age of 47 after a fall, but he gave the quest a new practical purpose, not just to extend life indefinitely, but to make it healthier and less painful while it lasted. You leave the defiant, brawling world of Paracelsus and travel north across the English Channel. The raw, revolutionary energy of the continent softens into something more courtly, more clandestine. You find yourself in Elizabethan England, in the latter half of the 16th century, a time of great exploration, artistic flowering, and political intrigue. And at the very heart of this world, straddling the line between science and superstition, is one of the most brilliant and enigmatic minds of the age, Dr. John Dee. You enter his home at Mortlake, just outside London. It is no mere alchemist's hovel. This is the house of a respected scholar, a courtier, and an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I herself. His library is one of the largest in all of England, far surpassing those at Oxford and Cambridge. Dee is a master of mathematics, navigation, and astronomy. A mainstream historical fact is that he was instrumental in planning the voyages of discovery that would define the era, and he was a key proponent of the new Gregorian calendar. He is, by any measure, a towering intellect of the Renaissance. But behind the respectable facade of the public scholar lies a secret, deeper obsession. Dee is a magus, a sorcerer in the old tradition, and he believes that the secrets of alchemy and the philosopher's stone are too profound to be found through chemistry alone. They must be obtained from a higher source. D has spent years poring over the ancient texts, from the Emerald Tablet to the Kabbalah, but he has reached a dead end. He believes that humanity has lost the true, original wisdom that God gave to Adam in the Garden of Eden. The scraps of knowledge found in books are just faint echoes. To achieve the great work, he needs to bypass the books and go straight to the source. He needs to talk to angels. This is where his quest takes a turn into the truly strange. Dee is not a natural psychic or seer. He tries for years to make contact with the spirit world, but gets nothing but celestial static. He needs an assistant, a scryer, someone with the natural gift of clairvoyance, who can gaze into a crystal or a polished black obsidian mirror and see the visions that are denied to him. After a series of failed partnerships, in 1582, a man named Edward Kelly walks into his life. Kelly is everything Dee is not: young, impulsive, a known forger with a shadowy past. Legend has it his ears had been cropped as a punishment for counterfeiting coins. He is a charlatan and an adventurer, but he seems to possess the one thing Dee so desperately needs: an open line to the angelic realms. You are now a silent observer in a darkened room in Dee's house at Mortlake. The air is thick with the smell of burning incense. Dee sits at a table, his long white beard flowing over a stack of notebooks. Kelly is hunched over a small, dark, polished stone, Dee's show stone. It is an obsidian mirror, brought back from the Aztec Empire in the New World. Kelly stares intently into its smoky depths while Dee recites prayers and incantations. After a long silence, Kelly's voice changes. He begins to describe what he sees. An angel has appeared in the stone, he says. An angel named Uriel. This begins a series of angelic conversations that will consume John Dee for the rest of his life. For hours on end, Kelly will gaze into the stone and describe his visions, and Dee, the meticulous scholar, will write down everything, every word, every symbol, every diagram revealed by the spirits. They communicate with a host of angels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, who reveal to them a complex, baffling, and beautiful system of magic. The angels teach them a secret Enochian language, the supposed tongue of the angels themselves, complete with its own alphabet and grammar. They dictate a series of cryptic calls or keys that can be used to summon spirits from the 30 ethers or dimensions that make up the heavens. The ultimate purpose of all this? The angels promise Dee the secret of the prima materia, the red powder of the philosopher's stone, which will allow him to cure diseases and transmute metals. They give him alchemical recipes, but they are couched in the same maddeningly symbolic language as the old texts. They promise him that he will be the one to usher in a new age of spiritual enlightenment for the world, uniting all of humanity under a single, divinely inspired religion. It's the alchemical dream writ large, a plan for the transmutation of the entire planet. The relationship between Dee and Kelly is fascinating and fraught with tension. Dee is the pious, brilliant scholar, desperate to believe. Kelly is the unreliable, hot-headed scryer, who often complains that the angels are bothering him and that he wants to stop. Is Kelly genuinely seeing these things? Or is he a masterful con artist, feeding Dee a web of elaborate fantasies spun from his own imagination and a knowledge of occult literature? This is the central debate that historians still argue over. Was Kelly a true psychic, a fraud, or perhaps something in between, a man whose own subconscious was projecting these incredible visions onto the stone? This story takes an even more bizarre and frankly uncomfortable turn. The angels, speaking through Kelly, eventually make a shocking demand. To prove their ultimate faith and obedience, and to seal their spiritual pact, they command Dee and Asa, Kelly, to swap wives. Dee is horrified. He is a deeply religious man, and this command goes against everything he believes. But Kelly insists it is the will of the angels. After much agonizing, Dee agrees. This deeply strange and controversial act, which they called cross-matching, marks the breaking point of their partnership. Soon after, Kelly leaves Dee, taking many of the secret papers and, more importantly, a supply of the red powder which he claimed the angels had finally helped him create. Kelly's later life is a classic alchemist's tale of hubris and downfall. He travels to the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II in Praga, hotbed of alchemical activity, and for a time he is celebrated. He performs a public transmutation, turning copper into gold, likely a trick using a hollowed-out stirring rod packed with gold dust. But he fails to produce the quantities of gold the emperor demands. He is eventually imprisoned as a fraud and dies from injuries sustained while trying to escape from his castle prison. A quirky detail, it's said that he had a second secret wife he kept hidden, a beautiful ghost woman only he could see, a claim which didn't exactly help his credibility. Dee returns to England, his reputation in tatters. He finds his magnificent library at Mortlake has been ransacked, many of his precious books and scientific instruments destroyed by a mob who believed him to be a malevolent wizard. He dies years later in poverty and obscurity. It's a tragic end for one of the era's greatest minds. He reached for the heavens, but his quest for angelic knowledge left him with nothing but dust and sorrow. His story is a powerful cautionary tale about the dangers of believing too much, of letting the desire for a secret, divine answer overwhelm reason and common sense. The angelic conversations brought him no gold, no elixir of life, only a legacy of beautiful, baffling, and ultimately fruitless mystery. You pull away from the tragic figure of John Dee, but you remain in the swirling intellectual currents of the early 17th century. A new and even more mysterious phenomenon is sweeping across Europe. A rumor whispered in letters, a promise proclaimed in anonymous pamphlets. It's the story of a secret society of alchemist sages who possess not only the philosopher's stone, but all the wisdom of the ancient world. They are said to be invisible, moving silently through the courts and universities of Europe, seeking worthy pupils to initiate into their ranks. They are the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, the ROSICRUCIANS. Your journey begins not in a laboratory, but in a print shop in the German city of Kassel in 1614. A small, anonymous pamphlet has just been published, and it's causing an immediate sensation. It's called the Fama Fraternitatis Rosae Crucis, or a report of the Brotherhood of the Most Laudable Order of the Rosy Cross. The pamphlet tells a compelling, mythic story. It describes a German nobleman named Christian Rosenkreuz, Christian Rosycross, who was born in 1378. As a young man, he travels to the Middle East, to Damascus, Egypt, and a mythical city called Damkar, where he is initiated into the secrets of Arabic magic, Kabbalah, and of course, alchemy. He returns to Germany with this vast store of secret knowledge, intending to share it for the good of mankind and to reform the arts and sciences of a corrupt Europe. He gathers a small circle of disciples, forming the original Rosicrucian Brotherhood. They swear an oath to keep the society secret for 100 years, to heal the sick for free, and to travel the world anonymously, helping humanity. Their symbol is a rose blooming upon a cross, a potent image representing resurrection, spiritual rebirth, and the union of the sacred and the worldly. The legend states that Christian Rosenkreuz lived to be 106 years old, his life extended by his alchemical knowledge. After his death, his body was placed in a hidden, seven-sided vault, which was designed to be a perfect microcosm of the universe. The Fama then makes a stunning announcement. The 100 years of secrecy are over. The tomb of Christian Rosenkreuz has been rediscovered by his later spiritual descendants. Inside, they found his body perfectly preserved, along with secret books and magical devices. And now, the pamphlet declares, the Brotherhood is ready to reveal itself and share its knowledge to usher in a new golden age. It ends with an open invitation. Any wise and sincere seeker who wishes to join their fraternity should make their desire known through published writings. The brothers, who can read men's souls, will find them. The effect of this pamphlet is electric. A second text, the Confessio Fraternitatis, appears a year later, confirming the existence of the Brotherhood and expanding on their Protestant leaning, anti-papal, and utopian beliefs. It's followed by a third, the Chemical Wedding of Christian. Rosencreuz, a beautiful but utterly bewildering alchemical allegory that describes a 7-day journey to a magical castle to witness the mystical marriage of a king and queen. This is a mainstream historical event known as the Rosicrucian Furor. For the next decade, the intellectual world of Europe is consumed by this mystery. Hundreds of people, from serious scholars to crackpots, publish pamphlets of their own, either praising the Brotherhood and begging for admission or denouncing them as a dangerous, heretical conspiracy. People claim to have met them. Others claim to be them. The walls of Paris were famously plastered with placards in 1623, proclaiming, "We, the deputies of the Higher College of the Rose-Croix, do make our stay, visibly and invisibly, in this city ... It was the ultimate secret society. They possessed the elixir of life. They could make infinite gold, and they were about to reform the world. The only problem? No one could find them. No one could prove they actually existed. This leads to the great, unresolved scholarly debate. Was the Rosicrucian Brotherhood a real physical organization, or was the whole thing a magnificent, elaborate hoax? A kind of intellectual game or practical joke? Many modern historians believe the pamphlets were the work of a small group of Lutheran intellectuals in Tübingen, Germany, led by a pastor named Johann Valentin Andrea. They argue that Andrea and his circle intended the story of Christian Rosencreuz as a ludibrium, a playful jest, a utopian allegory designed to inspire debate and encourage a reformation of science, religion, and society, not to create an actual secret society. Andrea himself later seemed to claim it was a joke that had gotten out of hand, but the genie was out of the bottle. People wanted to believe. Even if it was a fiction, it was a fiction that took on a life of its own. Here's a quirky tidbit. The philosopher René Descartes, the father of rationalism and the famous, I think, "Therefore I am," was so intrigued by the Rosicrucian mystery that he traveled around Germany trying to find the brothers. He never did, and concluded they must be imaginary. Ironically, his secretive, solitary lifestyle and his habit of moving frequently led some people to believe that he was a Rosicrucian. Hiding in plain sight, the Rosicrucian manifestos created the blueprint for much of Western esotericism. The idea of a hidden brotherhood of masters who guide humanity from behind the scenes would become a central feature of groups like the Freemasons, the Golden Dawn, and the Theosophical Society. The Rosicrucian promise was intoxicating. It was. Alchemy expanded from a personal quest to a global mission. It suggested that the elixir of life wasn't just for one person's benefit, but was part of a larger plan to heal the entire world. It took the alchemist out of the lonely, fume-filled lab and made him part of a secret, invisible team working to bring about a new dawn. Whether the original brotherhood was real or not, the idea of it became a powerful force. It inspired generations of alchemists, mystics, and philosophers. It gave them a sense of shared purpose, a feeling that they were not alone in their strange and often ridiculed pursuits. You stand in the imaginary, seven-sided tomb of Christian Rosencreuz. The air is still and sweet. There is no bubbling athanor, no smell of sulfur. There is only the quiet promise of hidden knowledge and a tantalizing possibility that somewhere, just beyond your sight, a secret master is watching, waiting to see if you are worthy. The Rosicrucian enigma proves that sometimes the search for the seekers can be as compelling as the search for the stone itself. You drift away from the grand, unproven promises of the Rosicrucians and return to the grime and grit of the alchemist's laboratory. It's 1669, and you're in the German port city of Hamburg. The scientific revolution is gaining momentum. The air is alive with new ideas about observation and evidence, but the old dreams die hard. In a dark, cluttered workshop, a man is embarking on one of the most bizarre and ill-conceived alchemical experiments of all time. And in doing so, he is about to stumble upon something utterly new, a substance that glows with an eerie, supernatural light. His name is Hennig Brand. Brand is a former glassmaker and merchant, a man of some means, but with a singular, all-consuming obsession. He is going to be the one to discover the Philosopher's Stone. Like so many before him, he believes the secret lies in the human body. He's read the old texts that speak of the prima materia, containing a vital spirit or life force. He's familiar with Paracelsus and the Alchemists who sought to extract the essence of life. Brand, however, has a very specific and very smelly idea of where to find it. He is convinced that the key to transmuting metals into gold lies locked within human urine. His logic, while flawed, has a certain alchemical poetry to it. Urine is golden in color. It comes from the human body, the pinnacle of creation. Therefore, it must contain a fiery spirit or water of life that, if properly concentrated and purified, could be used to create the stone. Convinced he is on the right track, he begins his grand experiment. This is not a small-scale operation. Brand collects a truly staggering quantity of urine, by some accounts, over 1,500 gallons or 5,500 liters. He gets it from his family, his neighbors, and even from soldiers in the local army barracks, presumably paying them for their contributions. His house must have been a landmark of olfactory horror for the entire neighborhood. You watch as he begins the process. First, he lets the massive vats of urine sit for weeks, putrefying until they release their full ammonia-rich potential. Then, he begins to boil it down. For days on end, his furnace roars as he reduces the vast lake of liquid into a thick, dark, syrupy concentrate. It's the kind of work that requires a cast-iron stomach and a profound lack of social awareness. It's a light joke now, but imagine explaining this career choice to your friends. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a professional urine boiler. The pay is terrible, but the fumes are memorable. After boiling it down, he takes the dark syrup and heats it to a much higher temperature in a retort, a glass vessel with a long neck. He is performing a dry distillation. As the tarry substance heats, vapors rise, travel down the neck of the retort, and cool, condensing into a heavy oil and a solid black residue. This is the stage where most people would probably give up, admit that all they've produced is a terrible smell and a lot of black gunk, and maybe take up a new hobby like gardening. But Brand persists. He takes the solid residue, mixes it with sand and charcoal, and heats it again, this time to a ferocious temperature, around 1,200 degrees Celsius. He keeps the retort sealed, allowing pressure to build. And then something incredible happens. As the mixture inside the retort incandesces, the vapors that come off and collect at the cool end of the vessel are not a liquid or a powder. They condense into a waxy, white substance. And as it cools, this substance begins to glow in the dark. Imagine the scene. Brand, exhausted, filthy, surrounded by the wreckage of his vile experiment, peers into the gloom of his lab. And there, in the collecting flask, is a soft, ethereal, greenish-white light. It's a cold light, giving off no heat. He has never seen anything like it. He has failed to create gold, but he has captured moonlight in a bottle. He calls it phosphorus, from the Greek for light bearer. This accidental discovery of the element phosphorus is a famous mainstream historical event in the story of science. Brand, however, doesn't see it as the discovery of a new element. In his alchemical worldview, he believes he has found the fiery spirit he was looking for, a pure, embodied form of the element of fire itself. He is intensely secretive, convinced that this glowing substance is a key stage on the path to the Philosopher's Stone. For a time, he keeps the method of its production a complete secret, hoping to use it to finally achieve transmutation. He tries mixing the phosphorus with silver, hoping it will turn to gold. It doesn't. He is a man who made one of the most significant chemical discoveries of the century, and he can't see it for what it is, because he is blinded by the golden promise of the past. Here's a quirky and slightly sad tidbit about the aftermath. Brand eventually runs out of money. Boiling 1,500 gallons of anything is not cheap, and is forced to sell his secret. He first sells it to a chemist named Johann Daniel Croft, who proceeds to tour the courts of Europe, showing off the magical glowing substance and passing the discovery off as his own. Kraft even demonstrates it for the famous scientist Robert Boyle. Later, Brand sells the full recipe to others. He never achieves the fame or fortune he dreamed of. He is a transitional figure, a man with one foot in the mystical past of alchemy and one foot in the empirical future of chemistry, who stumbled upon a profound truth but was looking for the wrong thing. Historians still debate the exact details of Brand's process. His original notes are lost, and the recipes were passed down and refined by others. Was it a complete accident, or did he have some reason to believe that heating the residue to such an extreme temperature would yield something special? Was he following a misinterpreted recipe from an old alchemical text? We'll likely never know for sure. What is certain is that his story is a perfect allegory for the end of the alchemical era. He followed a ridiculous, medieval-sounding recipe based on sympathetic magic and ended up performing the first-ever synthesis of a pure element that was not one of the ancient metals. He was looking for magic and found chemistry instead. The eerie, beautiful glow of his phosphorus was like a ghost light, illuminating the twilight of the alchemical age. You leave the foul-smelling laboratory of Hennig Brand and travel once more to England. It is the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the dawn of the Enlightenment. Reason, logic, and the mechanical philosophy are taking hold. You are in a world of precise mathematics, universal laws, and a clockwork universe set in motion by a divine watchmaker. And at the pinnacle of this world of reason stands a man whose name is synonymous with science itself, Sir Isaac Newton. You see him as the world remembers him, the brilliant, stern-faced president of the Royal Society, the Lucasian professor of mathematics at Cambridge, the master of the Royal Mint. This is the man who formulated the laws of motion and universal gravitation, who invented calculus, and who used a prism to demonstrate that white light is composed of a spectrum of colors. A mainstream historical fact is that his 1687 book, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, is arguably the single most important scientific work ever published. He is the very model of a modern scientist, a rationalist who banished magic from the cosmos and replaced it with elegant, predictable equations. But as you draw closer, you begin to see another side of this great man, a side he kept hidden from the world with paranoid secrecy. You follow him from the hallowed halls of Cambridge to a small, specially constructed laboratory he built behind his rooms. He calls it his laboratory. Inside, the pristine world of optics and mathematics dissolves into the familiar, chaotic world of the alchemist. A furnace, His own custom-built Athanor burns day and night. The shelves are crammed with the works of the old masters, Geber, Flamel, Paracelsus, and the mysterious Rosicrucians. And for 30 years, this giant of the scientific revolution will dedicate a huge portion of his life, his intellect, and his time to the ancient, mystical quest for the philosopher's stone. This is Newton the alchemist, a figure that was largely unknown to the public for centuries after his death. His family, embarrassed by this unscientific obsession, kept his alchemical papers locked away. It wasn't until the 20th century, when the economist John Maynard Keynes purchased a large collection of these papers at auction, that the world began to understand the depth of Newton's other life. Keynes was shocked, famously declaring that Newton was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last of the magicians. You watch Newton at work in his secret lab. He is not just reading the old texts. He is actively experimenting, trying to replicate and improve upon the ancient recipes. He roasts antimony to produce the star Regulus, just like the alchemists of old. He dissolves gold in aqua regia. He studies the growth of a philosophical tree, a crystalline structure that seems to grow like a plant from a seed of metal in a solution, believing it holds the key to the vegetative principle of minerals. He meticulously copies out recipes and treatises by hand, filling notebooks with cryptic symbols and allegorical language. In total, he wrote more than 1 million words on the subject of alchemy, far more than he ever wrote on optics or gravitation. Why would the architect of the mechanical universe be so obsessed with this ancient mystical art? Historians still argue about Newton's true motivations. Some believe he was simply trying to find a shortcut to wealth, a way to create gold to fund his other scientific work. But his writings suggest something much deeper. Newton believed that the ancient alchemists, particularly figures like Hermes Trismegistus, were privy to a pure, lost wisdom of Prisca Sapientia that had been corrupted over time. He believed that the myths and allegories of the alchemists were not just poetry. They were a secret code, a mystical language designed to hide profound physical truths from the vulgar and unworthy. He thought that if he could just crack the code, he would uncover not just the secret of transmutation, but the fundamental, unifying laws of God's creation. For Newton, alchemy was not separate from his physics. It was an extension of it. His law of gravity described an invisible force acting at a distance, a concept that was actually criticized by some of his contemporaries as being occult. In his alchemical work, he was searching for other, more subtle active principles in nature vegetative, spirits and vital agents that caused fermentation, growth, and chemical change. He believed the universe was not just a dead clockwork machine, but was permeated with the active, divine will of God. And alchemy was the experimental path to understanding that will dot. And now for a quirky and dangerous tidbit. Newton did not just study alchemy. He lived it. And like so many alchemists before him, he seems to have tasted his experiments. Analysis of surviving samples of his hair has shown that he had alarmingly high levels of mercury in his system. This may explain the famous severe nervous breakdown he suffered in 1693. For over a year, he was plagued by depression, insomnia, paranoia, and memory loss. He wrote wild, accusatory letters to his friends, including the philosopher John Locke, accusing them of trying to embroil him with women. For a long time, this was attributed to the stress of his work. But many historians now believe it was a classic case of chronic mercury poisoning, the same Mad Hatter disease that likely afflicted Zosimos and countless other alchemists. Newton, the greatest scientific mind of his age, was almost brought down by the same hazardous practices as his medieval predecessors. After his breakdown, Newton's intensive alchemical work seems to taper off. He moves to London to become warden of the Mint, where he ironically uses his knowledge of metallurgy to hunt down and prosecute counterfeiters men like Edward Kelly. He packs up his alchemical past and presents a respectable, rational face to the world. He never published any of his alchemical findings. It remained his great, secret work. The image of Newton in his hidden laboratory is a powerful symbol of a world in transition. He stands at a crossroads in history, a man who looked further into the future of science than anyone before him, yet remained deeply rooted in the mystical, alchemical past. His secret obsession shows that the line between magic and science is not as clear as we often like to think. For Newton, the quest to understand the force that holds the planets in their orbits and the search for the spirit that can turn lead into gold were two sides of the same coin, a single, all-consuming desire to read the mind of God. The shadow of Sir Isaac Newton's genius looms large over the 18th century, but it is his public face, the face of reason, mathematics, and empirical evidence, that the world chooses to remember. The secret fire of his alchemical furnace is slowly dying out, replaced by a colder, clearer light. You are witnessing a profound intellectual shift, a period that historians have called the Great Disenchantment. The world is being stripped of its spirits and its magical correspondences. The Ouroboros is uncoiling, and the mystical, holistic worldview of alchemy is being broken down into separate, specialized disciplines that you find yourself in the lecture halls and laboratories of the Royal Society in London and the French Academy of Sciences in Paris. The atmosphere is different now. The language has changed. No one speaks of the blood of the red lion anymore. They speak of oxides and phlogiston. The goal is no longer the spiritual perfection of matter, but its analysis, its measurement, its classification. The grand unified quest for the philosopher's stone is fracturing into the more modest, practical sciences of chemistry, metallurgy, and pharmacology. A key figure in this transition is a man who stands as a bridge between the two worlds. Anglo-Irish nobleman and scientist Robert Boyle. You see him in his laboratory, a place that looks far more orderly than the workshops of the past. Boyle, who died just as Newton was reaching the height of his powers, is often called the father of modern chemistry. A mainstream historical fact is that his 1661 book, The Skeptical Chemist, marked a crucial turning point. In it, Boyle attacks the old theories of Aristotle's 4 elements and Paracelsus's 3 principles. He argues that they are philosophical concepts, not things that can be demonstrated in a lab. He proposes a new definition of a chemical element, a simple substance that cannot be broken down into any other substances by chemical means. This is the definition we still use today. Boyle's approach is methodical and empirical. He is obsessed with repeatable experiments and precise measurements. He improves the air pump and uses it to study vacuums, leading to the formulation of Boyle's law, which describes the relationship between the pressure and volume of a gas. He is laying the groundwork for a new science, based not on ancient authority and secret symbolism, but on public demonstration and verifiable facts. And yet, Boyle was not entirely a modern man. Like Newton, he was a deeply pious Christian who believed his work was revealing the glory of God's creation. And, like Newton, he was secretly a practicing alchemist. He spent a great deal of time and money trying to achieve transmutation. He was convinced it was possible, and even used his influence to repeal an old English law that had made it illegal. The original law was passed to prevent people from debasing the currency. Boyle believed that if transmutation could be achieved, it would prove his corpuscularian theory of matter, the idea that all substances are made of different arrangements of tiny, fundamental particles. Changing one metal into another would be the ultimate proof. He even claimed to have witnessed a transmutation performed by a mysterious adept, but Boyle's secret passion could not stop the tide of the new chemistry he himself had helped to unleash. The decisive blow to the old worldview comes later in the 18th century with the work of the brilliant French chemist Antoine Lavoisier. You are now in Lavoisier's state-of-the-art laboratory in Paris, a place of gleaming balances, gasometers, and meticulously organized glassware. Lavoisier brings a level of quantitative rigor to chemistry that was previously unimaginable. His mantra is conservation of mass. In any chemical reaction, he insists nothing is lost, nothing is created. Matter is merely transformed. Using a massive, custom-built magnifying glass, he focuses the sun's rays to burn a diamond in a sealed jar, proving that it is a form of carbon. Through a series of elegant experiments, he heats mercury in a sealed container of air, showing that it combines with a portion of the air to form a red calx mercuric oxide. He carefully weighs everything before and after. He then heats the red calx, which releases the gas again, and he finds that its weight is exactly equal to the weight lost by the air in the first part of the experiment. He has isolated and named this gas oxygen. In doing so, he demolishes the phlogiston theory, the last great chemical theory of the alchemical era, which held that a fiery substance called phlogiston was released during combustion. Lavoisier proves that combustion is not the release of a mysterious substance, but the rapid combination with oxygen. This is the nail in the coffin for traditional alchemy. Lavoisier's work shows that water is not an element, but a compound of oxygen and hydrogen. Air is not an element, but a mixture of gases. The four ancient elements of Aristotle are finally, definitively, gone. The world is not made of earth, air, fire, and water, infused with principles of sulfur and mercury. It is made of dozens of unique, fundamental elements, each with its own measurable atomic weight. In this new, orderly, and quantifiable world, the notion of turning lead, element 82, into gold, element 79, by purifying, it becomes a physical impossibility. It's like trying to turn a cat into a dog by washing it. They are fundamentally different things, but even as the science of alchemy dies, the weirdness continues. A quirky fringe tidbit from this era of transition is the story of James Price, a respected English chemist and a Fellow of the Royal Society. In 1782, long after alchemy was considered a serious pursuit, Price stunned London society by announcing that he had succeeded in transmuting mercury into silver and gold. He performed 7 demonstrations for credible witnesses, apparently producing small but real amounts of the precious metals. The Royal Society was intrigued, but skeptical, and demanded he repeat his experiments in front of a special committee. Price prevaricated for months. Finally, cornered, he invited the committee to his laboratory. When they arrived, he raised a toast to their health, drank the contents of his own glass, which was filled with a fast-acting poison, hydrocyanic acid, and dropped dead at their feet. Historians still debate what exactly happened with James Price. Was he a deliberate fraud who chose suicide over exposure? Or was he a sincere but self-deluded man who had somehow tricked himself into believing he had succeeded, perhaps through contaminated equipment or wishful thinking, and couldn't bear the shame of his failure? Whatever the reason, his dramatic end serves as a grim and final punctuation mark on the history of Chrysopoeia. The dream of gold was over. The science of chemistry had won. The alchemists were no longer seen as sages. They were now charlatans or fools. The cold, clear light of Lavoisier's chemistry has dispelled the smoky mysteries of the old laboratories. The quest for the philosopher's stone is now seen as a historical curiosity, a relic of a superstitious past. And yet the human desire for marvels, for secrets, and for a good story never truly dies. In the late 18th century, the figure of the alchemist has one last spectacular curtain call. But this time, he is not a reclusive scholar or a tortured mystic. He is a showman, a con artist, and one of the greatest charlatans in history. You are about to meet the man who called himself Count Alessandro di Cagliostro. You first encounter him making a grand entrance into the glittering salons of Paris or the royal courts of Europe in the 1770s and 80s. He is a captivating figure, with dark, intense eyes, a charismatic presence, and a wardrobe that seems to be funded by an infinite source. He is accompanied by his beautiful wife, Serafina, who is often presented as a mystical priestess in her own right. Cagliostro's backstory is as magical as his claims. He hints that he is centuries old, his life sustained by the alchemical elixir. He speaks of having known the ancient masters, of having been initiated into the mysteries in the shadow of the Egyptian pyramids. He claims to be the head of a secret and powerful Egyptian rite of Freemasonry, a new and improved version that promises its followers not just moral improvement, but the secrets of magical healing and, of course, alchemy. In reality, Cagliostro was born Giuseppe Balsamo in 1743 in a poor neighborhood of Palermo, Sicily. From a young age, he showed a remarkable talent for grifting. He was kicked out of a monastery for bad conduct, where he had worked in the apothecary and picked up a smattering of chemical knowledge. He then made a living as a forger, a fortune-teller, and a seller of fake treasure maps. He and his wife traveled across Europe under a dizzying array of aliases, running scams in every major city from London to St. Petersburg. But it was when he adopted the persona, the aristocratic Count Cagliostro, that he truly hit the big time. You watch him perform his alchemical miracles, which are pure theater. He will take a silver coin from a skeptical nobleman, place it in a crucible with a mysterious powder, and after some impressive incantations, pour out a gleaming gold coin. The trick, of course, was simple sleight of hand swapping the silver coin for a gold one he had hidden up his sleeve. His most famous trick was increasing gold. He would take a piece of gold, melt it down, add some of his secret powder, and the resulting ingot would be heavier than the original. The secret? His powder contained hidden granules of gold, or heavier metal like lead, carefully calculated to produce the desired result. To a public raised on legends of Flamel and Paracelsus, it looked like real magic, but Cagliostro's true genius was in marketing the elixir of life. He didn't just sell a potion. He sold a lifestyle. He offered various rejuvenating treatments. One, the Cantel, involved a retreat of 40 days, a strict diet, bleeding, and taking small white drops of a mysterious liquid, likely just a harmless herbal concoction. At the end of the retreat, the client would emerge, supposedly decades younger. He sold bottles of his water of beauty and other restorative tonics for exorbitant prices. He never claimed to make you immortal overnight. He was cleverer than that. He offered a slow, gradual restoration of youth, a process that required his continued guidance, and naturally, his expensive products. A truly quirky tidbit about Cagliostro's methods involves his use of child scryers. Echoing John Dee and Edward Kelly, Cagliostro would use young boys or girls, whom he called doves or pupillae, as his clairvoyant mediums. He would perform a ritual, anointing the child's thumbnail with oil and having them stare into a carafe of water. He would then ask questions, and the child, either a well-rehearsed accomplice or a highly suggestible youth, would describe visions of the future, locate lost objects, or communicate with spirits. It added a layer of innocent, supernatural authority to his schemes, and was wildly popular with his aristocratic clientele, who loved a good séance. Cagliostro became a sensation. He was welcomed by the highest echelons of society. He healed the sick, often for free, a clever tactic to build a reputation for benevolence, gave alms to the poor, and dazzled everyone with his stories of ancient wisdom. He was, in many ways, the first celebrity guru. But his spectacular rise was destined for an equally spectacular fall. His downfall is a mainstream historical event known as the Affair of the Diamond Necklace in 1785. It was a complex scandal involving a gullible cardinal, a prostitute impersonating Queen Marie Antoinette, and a ridiculously expensive diamond necklace. Cagliostro was implicated in the plot to defraud the crown jewelers. Although he was eventually acquitted, the trial exposed him to public ridicule. His mystique was shattered. The press had a field day, digging into his real past as Giuseppe Balsamo, the petty criminal. His reputation destroyed in France. Cagliostro fled to Rome. It was a fatal mistake. In 1789, the year the French Revolution began, he was arrested by the papal authorities. The Inquisition, which had been hunting heretics for centuries, was not impressed by his alchemical claims. They charged him with heresy, magic, and founding a Masonic lodge. Under torture, he confessed to everything. His book, Maconnerie Egyptian, was publicly burned, and he was sentenced to death. The Pope later commuted the sentence to life imprisonment in the infamous fortress of Sam Leo. He died there in 1795, a broken man in a forgotten cell. Historians still debate the extent of Cagliostro's own beliefs. Was he a cynical, calculating fraud from start to finish? Or did he, like so many con artists, begin to believe his own hype? Did he think there was some real power in his rituals, even if they were embellished with trickery? It's impossible to know. What is clear is that he represents the final decadent stage of the alchemical dream. He stripped alchemy of its philosophy, its spirituality, and its genuine scientific curiosity, and turned it into a hollow but dazzling performance. He was the last of the great alchemists, and he wasn't an alchemist at all. He was a ghost, a performer playing a role the public was desperate to see one last time before the curtain fell for good. The prison door slammed shut on Cagliostro, and with him, a curtain seems to fall on the grand theatrical age of alchemy. The quest for the elixir of life, which began with emperors and mystics, ends in the cell of a charlatan. The world has moved on. The precise, predictable universe of chemistry has replaced the enchanted, symbolic cosmos of the alchemists. And yet, as you stand in the quiet of the 21st century, you can feel that the old dream hasn't entirely vanished. It hasn't died. It has simply transmuted. The alchemical echo lingers, reverberating in the most unexpected corners of our modern world. Most direct legacy, of course, is the science that supplanted it. Modern chemistry owes a significant debt to its magical ancestor. You can trace a direct line from the alchemist's smoky athanor to the modern chemist's regulated electric furnace. The glassware that populates any contemporary lab, the beakers, flasks, and condensers, are elegant refinements of the alembics, retorts, and philosophers' eggs that were born in the workshops of Zosimos and Jabir ibn Hayyan. This is a mainstream historical fact. Fundamental processes like distillation, sublimation, and crystallization, which are essential to countless modern industries, were all pioneered and perfected by alchemists in their obsessive quest to purify matter. They may have been chasing a fantasy, but their relentless experimentation laid the practical groundwork for a real and powerful science. Hennig Brand, boiling his vats of urine, wasn't just a fool. He was an accidental pioneer of elemental discovery. Even the alchemist's central goal of transmutation, once ridiculed as the ultimate example of magical thinking, has reappeared in a new, almost terrifying form. In the early 20th century, physicists like Ernest Rutherford discovered that radioactive elements naturally decay, spontaneously transmuting from one element into another. And with the invention of the particle accelerator, humanity finally gained the power to do it intentionally. In 1980, scientists at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory successfully transmuted a tiny amount of bismuth into gold. They had finally achieved the alchemist's dream. But the process was astronomically expensive, requiring a massive particle accelerator and vast amounts of energy. The joke was on the alchemists after all. It costs far more to make gold than it is actually worth. The ancient dream was realized not through a magical red powder, but through the brute force of nuclear physics. But the alchemical echo isn't just found in science. Perhaps its most profound legacy lies in the realm of the human mind. At the turn of the 20th century, the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung saw in the cryptic, allegorical writings of the old alchemists a powerful metaphor for his own developing theories of psychology. You find yourself in Jung's study, surrounded by replicas of alchemical woodcuts. Jung believed that the alchemists were not, for the most part, talking about literal chemical reactions. He argued that they had unconsciously projected a psychological process onto matter. The quest for the philosopher's stone was, in his view, a symbolic map of the process of individuation, the journey toward self-knowledge, wholeness, and the integration of the conscious and unconscious parts of our personality. For Jung, the prima materia, the chaotic base substance, was the undifferentiated, unconscious psyche of the individual. The laboratory vessel was the container of the self, the safe space for transformation. The long, difficult process of heating, dissolving, and purifying the solve et coagula was the psychological work of confronting one's own shadow, the dark, repressed parts of the personality, breaking down old defense mechanisms and integrating disparate parts of the self. The final achievement of the stone, the perfect union of opposites, often symbolized as a mystical marriage or a divine hermaphrodite, was the achievement of a balanced, whole, and enlightened personality. This reinterpretation of alchemy as a spiritual and psychological discipline has been enormously influential. And for a final, quirky tidbit, the language of alchemy is still embedded in our everyday speech. When you talk about a litmus test for an idea, you're invoking the color-changing papers alchemists used to test for acids and bases. When you say someone has a hermetically sealed argument, you're unknowingly paying tribute to Hermes Trismegistus and the airtight flasks of his followers. The very idea of a panacea, a cure-all for problems, is a direct descendant of the elixir of life. The alchemists may be gone, but their words are still with us. So the quest ends. Or does it? Historians still debate the ultimate meaning of the alchemical tradition. Was it a failed science, a spiritual discipline, a psychological projection, or a grand cultural delusion? It was, of course, all of these things at once. It was a beautiful, chaotic, and profoundly human endeavor. It was born from our two deepest fears, poverty and death, and our two greatest hopes, perfection and eternity. The alchemists were dreamers, scholars, fools, and pioneers. They worked in secret, wrote in riddles, and often died from the very materials they hoped would save them. They failed, in the end, to find the elixir of life. No one has ever discovered a potion for immortality. But in their magnificent, obsessive, and often beautiful failure, they revealed something deep about the human spirit, our unquenchable thirst for transformation. We still seek to turn our leaden struggles into golden triumphs, to find the magic that will cure our ills, to live lives that are richer, fuller, and perhaps just a little bit longer. The laboratory has changed, the language is different, but the great work continues. And so, our journey through the smoky workshops and secret libraries of the lost alchemists comes to a close. The fires in the Athenors have dwindled to embers. The bubbling in the retorts has ceased, and the cryptic symbols in the old books fade back into the quiet dust of history. The great, overarching narrative of turning lead into gold and conquering death itself has resolved into the softer, more intricate stories of chemistry and psychology, of human ambition and the slow, inevitable march of time. The grand promises of the elixir of life have settled, like fine sediment, into our modern hopes for just one more tomorrow, for a cure for what ails us, for a moment of golden insight in a leaden world. Let the final images dissolve gently in your mind. See the faint, ethereal glow of phosphorus in a darkened German lab, the glint of a false gold coin in a Parisian salon, the silent, steadfast gaze of a terracotta soldier guarding his emperor's final mercury-laced dream. These stories, once so vibrant and urgent, can now recede, becoming part of the soft, deep fabric of the past. The search for immortality was a long and winding path, filled with brilliant minds and spectacular failures. But for tonight, that search is over. There is no need to continue the quest, no need to decipher the riddles. There is only the simple, gentle stillness of this moment, here in the comfort of your own quiet space. All that is left to do is rest.